Hi, everybody. So today you have two tasks. The first one is to finish the Holding Back the Floods article from yesterday. So go back to Tuesday. And if you have not yet finished reading the article and answering the questions on the Google Slides, go back and check that you answered all 8 responses. And then there's one last one at the very end. So please make sure that you did that, okay? And then turn it in. The second thing that I want you to do today is just to watch this little presentation part. So as soon as you're ready for that part, you can start the rest of this video. So if you want to stop and go back and watch this after you finish the other assignment, you can. But if you're finished with that, the reading and the questions, let's go ahead and continue with this little slide just for a few minutes to kind of give you an idea of what we're doing the rest of the week. Okay, let me put this on present and we'll start. So we've been talking a lot about hurricanes, and in our discussion about hurricanes, one of the biggest things that we've really been talking about is flooding, right? The most dangerous part of a hurricane. So I included this on slide 2. If you want to watch it, it's like 4 or 5 minutes. It's a great video about storm surge and the flooding that happens in hurricanes, in particularly what happened in Katrina and other hurricanes around the world. If you've got a couple minutes, I'd highly recommend that you click on it and watch it. For this presentation right now, I'm going to go past it. But basically, and we've talked about this, one of the most dangerous parts of a hurricane is just all the flooding that occurs, right? That storm surge that because of the wind and the extra water that's getting blown around ends up flooding the shore, right? So what we're going to do for the rest of the week is we're going to collaborate together and work in a group, much like scientists do around the world, to try to learn about how we control water, whether it's from flooding or hurricanes, and we're going to build something that's going to hopefully protect against flood and flooding from hurricanes. So we're going to just look at a couple examples. It was in your article, but I want to point them out. So the first example, and these are all of different places that happen all over the world. But if we look on the globe here, here's the U.S., here's the Netherlands across the Atlantic Ocean. It's in Europe. So close to it are Belgium, France, and Germany. But here's a country that not only has a ton of rivers, is super low. The sea level is really low. So that means that most of the land is below the sea level. So it's really low. Elevation, and a lot of the population lives along water areas, and it's a frequent flooder. So if there's anywhere in the world that could teach us about how to prevent and lessen the floods, it would be the Netherlands. So if you actually take a look at, see the border here with the red dots. If you actually take a look at, this is the whole country of the Netherlands. You can kind of tell because there's really funky city names, right? And interesting names of all the different protections. But if you look at this is the Netherlands really close up. Look at how many waterways there are. All the red markings on here are the places where the Netherlands have had to set up defenses for water and for flooding, major systems, as well as all the little ones that are throughout the countryside. So Netherlands certainly knows its stuff when it comes to preparing for flooding. So a lot of times in the U.S. and other countries, we look at Netherlands to get ideas about how to stop our flooding from hurricanes or just flooding in general from rivers. So let's take a look at an example. This is the one that I really can't say very well, the Maaslanterijn, which is in the Netherlands. And basically, this is an example. This was in your article. It's a giant gate. It's considered one of the modern engineering marvels of the whole world. But there's giant gates that swing open and basically keep extra water from coming into the country. So whenever there's an excess of flow or they're getting too much down, water into their countryside, they can put the gates up and it stops it. Here's another picture. So here we can see, let me look at the constant waterways, right? But look at all the land and buildings and towns that are going to be along this waterway and how low it is. So this will help keep in some of the water, right? In addition to that, the Netherlands is also known for things called polders, which are just a different word for dikes. And basically, those are elevated strips of land that try to keep water out. So if we look at these two dudes right here giving us the thumbs up, they're on an actual path that you could actually bike on. But if you notice, the area is elevated, right? So right off the beach, there's naturally raised land that they've built out that hopefully will keep the water from going down to this lower part, right? So it's raised land. If you take a look at this, here's another example. So we've got pretty low land here. Here's a river, right? River that is transport and using for all sorts of things. But there's a lot of structures that are around the river, probably floods quite a bit. And so look at what they built. Do you see how it's kind of built up here where that if the water were to flow off of it, it's got a little bit of extra elevation to keep it up. Okay, another example is here's along the beach, right? So you can see these stone structures here that will help keep the water at bay and keep them from, from rising over this little hump that was made. That's man-made. Okay, this is what's called a sluice. Sluices are part of the Dutch system or the Netherlands also, and you can sometimes see these in the U.S. and other countries, but basically they are kind of like dams where they can control and hold in excess water. So let's say there's a bunch of excess water that had flooded over here. It can put down a gate, hold it in, have it pile up a little bit higher, and then at slow increments let it in to prevent total massive flooding all at once. Here's another example of the Netherlands. These are polders and dikes and sluices all working together. So these gates would come down to keep some of the water from coming in. So pretty sophisticated systems that they've had to build all over this country. Okay, other examples is the Netherlands, because a lot of people live along the water. They have actually started experimenting with making floating houses. So all of these houses are along the water, but they're floating. So they're able to, look at, there's even kind of a little basement area here, but they're able to float on the water. So as the water level goes up or down, they just kind of float on it and have a lot of structures that are able to float and move along the water, even if the water level goes up. So pretty crazy. Another system that's used in the U.S. and around the world, but is also known in the Netherlands, is really protecting coastal areas. So lands that are around the coast, by the ocean, by water, things that were like beaches or marshes. Oops, and I wrote it marches. Whoops, it should be marshes. But they can really protecting them and making sure there's lots of greenery and trees and reeds and vegetation will really help keep a natural buffer from the storm. Because if this overflows or this gets a lot of water, not only can the plants and the greenery suck in a lot of the water, but it's a natural buffer. It'll hold in a lot of that water and keep it from overflowing rather than a concrete or some kind of city structure. Even places like Chicago, which can receive a lot of land. If you think about the city of Chicago, there's a lot of concrete. Concrete is a non-porous structure, which means that when it rains, the water just kind of sits on it or sloshes off of it and goes downhill. So you end up with a lot of areas where puddles just sit, right? So if you look at the side where it says before, this is pretty bad for when there's flooding, right? It's going to fill right up in this alleyway and cause a lot of flooding. People won't be able to get through. So what do they make instead? They try to make it more green. They put in more gardens. They put in more bushes. They put in more permeable surfaces. See these things that I have pointing to right here on the side that kind of look like they're little grates? Well, that is a more porous surface. The water can go down into the ground and get soaked in a little bit better, much safer and better for transportation. So things like that can make a difference too, whether it's hurricanes or cities that you're dealing with. So here's another picture. See how this alleyway has been expanded? Look at all the greenery and shrubs that can now absorb the rain and keep it pretty dry as opposed to just a yucky system. Okay, in China, they're working on these cities called sponge cities. And basically that means that instead of just, if you think about downtown Chicago, there's a lot of concrete, right? So what they're trying to do is really try to add a lot of greenery, rip out the concrete and put green wherever they can. So get rid of the pavements that are all concrete and try to build trees and plants and grass there, and even put that up on the roof so that there's a lot of natural places where the water can fall and it can get soaked into and basically become part of the plant's resources, right? The plants can use it for drinking water and it won't go into flooding structures. So here's an example of one of those sponge cities. So take a look at it, a large river in China. Look at what they're trying to do around it. So if it floods, there's lots of extra greenery to soak in and take in that water instead of old concrete. And then another example, and what we're really going to focus on is something called levees. Levees are a lot like dikes in the Netherlands and around the world, where basically they're walls that are man-made that either build up the land or try to stop the water from going over. So sometimes that's a concrete or a structure that's like made of a bunch of dirt piled up. Sometimes it can be things like sandbags. But basically, it's anything that a city does to try to keep the water from overflowing, a natural barrier. So what we're going to do starting tomorrow, and you're going to do this in groups, so we're going to have a little competition, is you're going to build a levee, something that kind of looks like this. And we're going to pretend that there's going to be a hurricane that goes through and your city is along the coast. and it's going to experience storm surge. So it's going to experience some flooding, and your job is going to be able to try to keep that city from flooding. So if you look at the directions here, you're going to get a tub. It's kind of like a shoe box size container that's plastic, and it's called a prototype, and it's like an example. And if you look at the directions, it says your prototype must be at least 5 inches high, and I'll show you what that looks like, and wide enough to prevent the water on one side of a plastic container from flooding into the other side of the container. So I'm going to show you this quick video to give you an idea of what we're going to build. So again, this structure would be called the levee. We're going to use a whole bunch of different supplies. These are some examples. We're going to use a little bit more than this, but this is similar to what we're going to use. Okay, so I'm just going to go through it, and you're going to build it in a variety of ways. And then what we're basically going to do, is we're going to pour water into one side of it and see how well it holds up. So there's lots of different ways to create this. So here's an example. I'm going to pour slow increments of water into it, and you're going to have to see if your town on the other side survives. Okay, so there's an example of what a levee is. Okay, that's basically what we're going to be building. But here's the trick. Okay, come on. Okay, here's the trick. You will only get a certain amount of supplies. So your budget is 10 fake dollars, okay? And you're only going to be able to use $10 to build your supplies, okay? So once your $10 runs out, that means you are done and you can't get any more supplies. So your group is going to have to decide what you want to get. So 1 cup of sand or gravel will be $1. And then you've got cotton balls, straws, popsicle sticks, duct tape, paperboard, which is like cardboard, a plastic bag, and a sponge. Look at all these prices. So if you buy 4 sponges in a plastic bag, you're done. That's all you get. So your group, starting tomorrow, is going to think about how they want to build their levee, and they're going to be designing it and working on the cost, okay? And that's basically what we're going to be doing tomorrow. Tomorrow in class, you're going to meet with your group. You're going to talk about what your plan is. You're going to think about the money aspect of it. You're going to test some materials to see how well they hold up against water. And then Friday will be our contest. Friday, each group will build their levee for about 25 minutes, and then we'll test it and see which one did the best. Okay? All right, so just a little introduction about what we're going to do the rest of the week. There's nothing else that you have to do besides finishing that reading assignment from yesterday. Have a great day, everybody.